My name is Brittany, and if you think all wealthy families are fairy tales, let me tell you about mine. I was born into money, but that's just about where the good part stops. From the day I was born, I was more of a burden than a blessing, at least to my mother. I was a restless baby, always crying, never sleeping through the night. My mother, Linda, just couldn't handle it. I think the only peace I gave her was when I was quiet, which wasn't often. "Darn kid, can't you give it a rest for just 1 minute?" she would snap, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Dad was different. His name was George, and he was the gentle soul of the house. When he'd get home from work, he'd take me from my mother's arms so quickly, like he was saving me from falling. "Hey, princess, let's give your mom a break, huh?" he'd say as he lifted me, always with a smile. Then he'd carry me around, talking about his day, showing me things around the house as if I understood every word. Dinner times were always tense. Mom would fuss over my sister, Emily, who came 2 years after me and was as quiet as a mouse, everything I wasn't. Emily was the golden child, barely making a sound, smiling and cooing like the babies you see in diaper ads. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Mom would often say, comparing us as if I had any control over how much I cried or how loud I got. It stung, but Dad always had a way of smoothing things over. "Brittany's just got more fire, Linda. Let her be," he'd defend me, but it was like throwing water on a grease fire. As I got older, it didn't get much better. I learned to walk and talk, and Dad was indeed my first word, spoken with a gummy smile that made my father's face light up like it was Christmas morning. Mom just muttered under her breath and went back to fussing over Emily, who'd just started crawling silently around on a plush blanket. The house was huge, with more rooms than we needed, but it felt smaller every day, filled with the silence between my parents. Dad started teaching me things early, how to set the table, how to fold laundry. It was our time, and I cherished it, even though I didn't understand why Mom wouldn't join us. "Why does Mom like Emily more?" He paused, the dish towel in his hand stopping midair. "It's not about liking more, Britt. Sometimes, people they have a hard time showing love, even if it's there. Your mom, she struggles." It was a simple answer, but it didn't satisfy me. Nothing could explain why my birthdays were quiet affairs with simple cakes, while Emily's were grand celebrations, with presents stacked high like the towers I built with my blocks. As I grew up, the divide in our family became more like a chasm. I was old enough to notice how differently Mom treated Emily and me. It was like living in 2 separate worlds under the same roof. Mom's world revolved around Emily, with me just orbiting around the edges. "Brittany, can you tidy up your sister's mess in the living room? I'm taking her to ballet," Mom would command as if it was the most natural thing in the world, her tone brisk and expecting compliance without question. "Why doesn't she clean up her own mess? She's not a baby anymore," I'd protest, feeling the injustice like a bitter taste in my mouth. "Because I asked you to do it. Don't start your nonsense, just get it done," she'd snap back, her words sharp and final. There was no arguing with Mom. Her word was law, and in her law book, Emily did no wrong. School was my escape. It was the one place where I wasn't just Emily's older sister. I had my own friends, my own successes. But even there, the shadow of home life loomed large. I'd overhear other kids talking about family outings and vacations, things we never did as a family because Mom said they were unnecessary expenses. Though somehow, there was always money for Emily's new dresses or ballet classes. "Brittany, you're wearing that to school?" Emily would smirk, eyeing my worn-out jeans and hand-me-down sweater as she adjusted her shiny new backpack. "Yeah, what's wrong with it?" I'd shoot back, feeling my cheeks heat up. "Nothing. Just looks old, that's all," she'd reply with a shrug, her tone dripping with faux innocence that didn't fool me. Dad was still my rock, though. In the evenings, he'd help me with homework or we'd fix things around the house together. It was during these moments that I felt valued. "Britt, hand me that screwdriver, will ya?" Dad would ask as we worked on repairing an old dresser. "Here you go, Dad." "Why doesn't Mom see me, Dad?" Why am I always the one getting the short end of the stick? My voice would crack, a mix of anger and sadness. Dad sighed, wiping his brow. Life's not always fair, kiddo. But you've got to play the hand you're dealt. Keep your head up, do your best, and things will work out. You'll see. The advice was good, but it didn't suit the sting of watching Emily receive all of Mom's affection. On the rare occasion that Mom did pay attention to me, it was usually to criticize or compare me unfavorably to Emily. Brittany, why can't you keep your room as neat as your sister's? Mom would chide during her brief inspections of my space. Maybe because I actually use my room for more than just sleeping, I'd retort, my words a mix of jest and jab, trying to mask the hurt. Smart mouth won't get you anywhere. Try being more like your sister, she'd retort, her face set in a frown that seemed permanently etched when she looked at me. I knew I couldn't expect anything from Mom or hope for any change. My focus had to be elsewhere, on my escape plan. Just a couple more years, Britt. Just hang in there, I'd whisper to myself at night, staring at the ceiling and dreaming of the day I could leave and start my own story, one where I wasn't just a secondary character in my own life. As graduation approached, Dad and I had more serious conversations about my future, always out of earshot of Mom or Emily. Britt, I want you to go to college. I've been putting some money aside, Dad confided one evening while we washed the dishes together. Really? But Mom said we can't afford it because of Emily's college fund, I replied, the skepticism in my voice mirroring the frustration I felt. We'll manage something for you. Don't worry about your mother, Dad assured me, though his brow furrowed with worry. The idea of college was my lifeline, a chance to escape and build my own life. But Mom had other plans, one she made clear during one of her more cutting diatribes. Brittany should just stay and work. We need to save for Emily, she declared one day out of the blue, not a hint of discussion in her tone. But Mom, I want to go to college. I've been talking about it for years, I protested, my voice barely above a whisper. And I said no. You can help the family by working here and giving us your salary. That's final, Mom snapped, her decision dropping like a guillotine on my hopes. The finality of her words was the push I needed. I couldn't stay, not with my dreams dismissed so easily. The day after graduation, I packed my things and left a note for Dad. It was still dark out when I stepped out of that house for the last time, the early morning chill mirroring the coldness I felt inside. I moved into a tiny room above the cafe, where I started working right away, picking up every shift I could. In the evenings, I worked at a local shop, saving every dime. Dad would visit sometimes, slipping me some extra cash. Keep this for your college fund, Britt. It's not much, but it's something, he'd say, handing me an envelope stuffed with a wad of crumpled bills. Every night, after my shifts, I'd count my savings, chuckling to myself. Look at you, Britt, like a gremlin hoarding over a pot of gold, I'd whisper, the coins and bills a tangible testament to my efforts and dreams. After years of scraping by, working every shift I could, and living off canned beans and toast, I finally saved enough to cover my first year at the local college studying interior design. That first semester was brutal. I juggled classes during the day and shifts at the cafe at night. But the hard work paid off when one of my design projects won an award at a local competition. That win wasn't just a boost to my confidence, it came with a scholarship and free tuition. I could hardly believe it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was breathing instead of suffocating under constant worry. Looks like all those nights hunched over your drafting table paid off, huh? Marty, my boss at the cafe, said as he read the announcement in the local paper. Yeah, I guess they did, I replied, the relief evident in my voice. Dropping my second job was a luxury I never thought I'd afford. Now, I could focus solely on my studies and the cafe, giving my all to what I loved most. College was a blur of late nights, strong coffee, and endless creativity. I thrived in the environment, surrounded by other students who were just as passionate as I was. By the time graduation rolled around, I had a job offer from the most prestigious interior design firm in the city. It felt like a dream. The job was everything I hoped for and more. I threw myself into my work, spending hours at the computer, sketching and bringing ideas to life. But as my workload increased, I found myself needing a release from the constant screen time and stress. One morning, I decided to start running in the park next to my apartment. Nothing too intense, just enough to clear my head. I quickly realized my old sneakers weren't going to cut it, so I headed to a specialized sports store to find something better. The store was quiet that morning, just a few early birds like myself milling about. I browsed through the aisles until a sales consultant approached me. "Looking for something specific, or just browsing?" he asked, his approach casual but confident. "Running shoes. I need something that won't fall apart after a week," I replied, trying to sound as knowledgeable as possible, though I had no clue what I was looking for. He chuckled. "I think I can help with that. What's your mileage like?" "Pretty amateur. Just trying to keep my sanity intact with a morning run," I confessed, feeling a bit embarrassed. "No worries, we've all been there. Let me show you something durable but comfy," he said, leading me to a display of shoes that looked way more high-tech than I anticipated. We spent the next half hour discussing the merits of different brands and types of support. It was clear he knew his stuff, and I actually found myself enjoying the conversation more than I thought. As I paid for the shoes, Jake leaned over the counter slightly. "Listen, if you ever need more running tips or, I don't know, someone to run with, here's my number," he said, scribbling on the back of the store's card. I laughed, a bit taken aback by his forwardness, but found myself saying, "Thanks, Jake. Maybe I will." True to his word, Jake was full of running tips, and it wasn't long before our morning runs became a regular thing. Eventually, Jake and I started seeing each other outside of our running sessions. We'd grab coffee, catch a movie, and spend nights at my apartment talking about everything and nothing. He moved in shortly after, and life felt surprisingly complete. But when the topic of making things official came up, Jake hesitated. "I think we're still too young, Britt. We need to get to know each other better, you know?" And so, I embraced it, my new job, my relationship with Jake, my morning runs. Life was finally feeling like it was on my terms, and I was determined to enjoy every moment of it. The ring of the phone shattered the calm of our lazy Saturday morning. I glanced at the caller ID, it was Mom. My stomach tightened, she only called when something was wrong. "Hello?" I answered, bracing myself. "Brittany, it's your dad. He's very sick. You need to come home." Mom's voice was curt, each word sharp with urgency. I felt Jake's hand squeeze mine, his concern mirroring my own. "We'll leave right away," I said, the weight of her words sinking in. As we pulled up to the house, Jake whistled lowly. "Wow, this place is huge. Didn't realize you grew up in a mansion." Walking in, the air was thick with tension. Mom and Emily were in the foyer, their expressions strained. "Brittany, finally," Mom said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Your sister and I are in the middle of something important." "Nice to see you too, Mom," I replied dryly. I introduced Jake, and their polite nods were perfunctory at best. Without waiting for an invitation, I led Jake to Dad's room. He was lying in bed, looking frail and pale. My heart clenched at the sight. "Dad?" I approached tentatively. "Brittany," Dad's voice was a hoarse whisper. He motioned me closer. "I need to say something. I'm sorry. For everything." I took his hand, tears stinging my eyes. "It's okay, Dad. I don't hold anything against you. We're okay." We joined the others for dinner, but the atmosphere was stifling. Mom and Emily chatted about the inheritance as if Dad was already gone, discussing sums and plans with cold calculation. "And with the accounts, we should be set for quite a while," Emily said, her voice light and greedy. I exchanged a look with Jake, his expression one of disbelief. "Excuse me," I interrupted. "Can we not do this right now? Dad's still here." "Oh, Brittany, don't be so sensitive. We're just being practical," Mom chided, her tone dismissive. The meal couldn't end fast enough. Jake and I excused ourselves, the pretense of civility, too much to bear. As we drove back, the silence was a relief from the suffocating dinner conversation. "Britt, I've been thinking. Marry me?" Jake suddenly blurted out, his eyes earnest. I was stunned, a myriad of emotions swirling through me. "What? Now?" "Yeah, why not? Life's short, we love each other, we're happy. Let's do it. No big wedding, no fuss. Just us." The simplicity of his proposal, coming after the stark reminder of life's fragility, resonated with me. "Yes, Jake. Let's do it." We didn't waste time. The following week, we stood together at City Hall, exchanging vows in a simple ceremony devoid of guests but full of our commitment to each other. It felt right, like the perfect rebellion against my family's materialism. The weeks following my new commitment with Jake were a surreal mix of new marital bliss and the grim reality of my father's deteriorating health. I made it a point to visit him more often, despite the cold welcome from Mom and Emily. During one particularly hard visit, Dad, his voice barely above a whisper, confided in me. "Brittany, when I'm gone, there'll be something for you. A surprise, of sorts." His eyes, though tired, had a flicker of urgency. I squeezed his hand, choosing not to delve deeper. "Let's not talk about that now, Dad. You need to rest," I said softly, thinking it was just the illness talking. Back at the house, Mom and Emily seemed increasingly fixated on the aftermath of Dad's inevitable passing. "We need to think about the bills, and what comes after," Mom said one afternoon, her tone cold and calculative. She was already planning to rearrange her life, frequently disappearing for hours on end for beauty treatments and consultations. Emily, freshly graduated and utterly uninterested in seeking employment, filled her nights with parties and social gatherings, sleeping through her days without a care. I couldn't bear to see how they neglected Dad, their sights set on what they could gain from his departure. The call came on a rainy Thursday morning. Mom's voice was flat, emotionless. "Your father passed away last night. We're arranging the funeral for this weekend." The news hit like a punch to the gut. I felt Jake's arms around me as I tried to process the pain. "I'm so sorry, Britt. We'll get through this together," he murmured, his support a small comfort in the vast emptiness I felt. The funeral was a blur. People came and went, offering their condolences, speaking of my father's kindness and integrity, qualities so starkly absent in my mother and sister. As we gathered in the living room, Jake suddenly spoke out. "So, what's going to happen with the inheritance? I deserve to know what my wife will get." "It's not the time, Jake," I hissed, my eyes pleading with him to drop it. But it was too late. The topic was open, and the vultures swooped in. Mom and Emily began outlining their plans for the assets, as if Dad's ink was already dry on their greedy script. "And the house," Jake suddenly interjected. "It should go to Brittany. It's only fair. We'll live here." Mom laughed, a harsh sound that echoed against the cold walls. "This house is for Emily and me. You two have no claim here," she sneered, her gaze icy. Jake's demeanor shifted then, turning on a dime. He smiled at Emily, his tone dripping with a sweetness that made my skin crawl. "You know, Emily, you've really grown into quite the woman." "I always thought so." I stood there, frozen, as the scene before me descended into chaos. Mom and Emily, flattered by Jake's sudden attention, didn't notice my departure. I walked away, my heart breaking in my chest, and made my way to my father's room. The sun was already high by the time I woke up in my father's room. I headed to the kitchen, determined to not let the house's oppressive atmosphere get to me. But as I reached for the coffee, Jake appeared, his face solemn. "Britt, we need to talk," he said, blocking the refrigerator door. His tone sent a chill down my spine. "What is it now, Jake?" I asked, bracing myself for more bad news. He took a deep breath. "I want a divorce, Britt. I've fallen for Emily. I'm going to marry your sister," he blurted out, not meeting my eyes. He handed me a stack of papers, divorce papers, already filled out. I stood frozen, the papers trembling in my hands. "This has to be some sick joke," I said, but the look on his face told me it wasn't. I stormed out of the kitchen, calling for Emily and Mom. They came into the living room, expressions of faux innocence plastered on their faces. Emily spoke first. "I wanted to tell you, Britt. I didn't want to go behind your back. That's why Jake and I are being upfront now." Mom nodded, adding her own twisted logic. "It's very noble of them, really. I'm proud of Emily for handling this so maturely." The room spun around me as their words echoed, bile rising in my throat. "Noble? Mature? You're talking about betrayal," I spat out, my words laced with disbelief and hurt. I knew then what I had to do. I grabbed the divorce papers from the coffee table where I had thrown them, signed them with a shaky hand, and threw them back at Jake. "You'll get your things by courier," I said, my voice cold and detached. 2 weeks later, the day to read Dad's will had come. We gathered at the notary's office, the air thick with tension. My family's faux civility couldn't mask their greed, their eyes hungry and calculating. The notary cleared his throat and began reading the will. "To my daughter, Brittany, I leave all my monetary assets, totaling $500,000. The room erupted. Mom's face twisted in rage as she screamed about her debts, how she had taken loans, expecting to pay them back with the inheritance. Emily shrieked at her, accusing her of being old and useless, saying she needed the money for her lavish wedding with Jake. Then, as if on cue, they all turned to me, their faces a grotesque mix of anger and desperation. "You have to give us that money, Brittany. It's only fair." Mom yelled, tears streaming down her face, tears she hadn't shed at Dad's funeral. Jake saw his opportunity. He stepped towards me, arms outstretched, a rehearsed line of regret ready. "Britt, I've missed you. I only ever loved you, really." I recoiled as Emily grabbed him, pulling him back. "You're mine now," she hissed, her nails digging into his shirt. The notary, disgusted, threatened to call the police if they didn't calm down. "This is a legal proceeding, not a circus. Behave accordingly, or leave." Before I walked out, they hurled curses at me, saying I would never be happy with the money. I looked them in the eyes, a sad smile on my lips. "Happiness isn't something you buy or steal. It's something you build. And I'll build mine away from all of you," I said, my voice steady. With the inheritance from my dad, I finally did something I'd dreamed of for years. I started my own interior design company. Naming it was easy. I called it George's Designs, a nod to the man whose quiet strength had always inspired me. The business started small, just me and a rented space in a bustling part of the city. But word of mouth spread fast, mostly because I poured every ounce of my passion and learned skills into every project. Before long, I was hiring staff, looking at bigger office spaces, and planning an expansion. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. One afternoon, as I was reviewing fabric samples, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I peeked through the peephole. It was Jake, standing there with a huge bouquet of flowers and that smirk I knew all too well. I opened the door a crack, enough to speak, but not enough to invite him in. "What do you want, Jake?" "Britt, baby, I made a huge mistake. I miss you. I know I messed up, but I know you, I know us. We were good together," he said in a soft voice, pushing the bouquet closer. I stared at the flowers, then back at his face. "We were good, until you decided my sister was better, right?" My voice was calm, but laced with ice. "Look, that was a mistake. I was confused, but I'm here now, for you," he pleaded, his eyes searching mine for a flicker of forgiveness. But there was nothing left to rekindle. "Jake, listen carefully. I wish you all the best, really. But there's no us. Not now, not ever again," I said, my voice firm. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off by stepping back and slamming the door in his face. Through the wood, I could hear his muffled protests, but they faded into the background as I returned to my work. Later, I heard through mutual friends that Mom and Emily had been forced to sell the house to settle their debts. They'd moved far out of town into a small, cramped apartment, far from the luxurious life they'd always prioritized over family. My business continued to grow, and with each successful project, I felt more vindicated in my decision to stand alone. The freedom of being my own boss, of building something from nothing, it gave me a sense of purpose and pride I'd never known. The future was a canvas, and I was ready to paint it with broad, bold strokes.